Fight fans, welcome to the PBC podcast, brought to you by Premier Boxing Champions with your host, Kenneth Bouhairie and Michael Rosenthal.
Welcome everyone to the PBC podcast. I'm Kenneth Bouhairie.
I'm Michael Rosenthal, editor of USA Today's Boxing Junkie.
We want to thank you all for joining us this week. The year is coming to a close, and what a year it's been. To that end, Showtime Sports President Steven Espinoza is this week's guest. Espinoza will recap 2020 and also give us a preview of what's in store for 2021. Plus, we'll look back at last weekend's action, including Chris Colbert's big win and the return of Anthony Joshua. We'll also look ahead to this week's action. Lots of fights to go over. And finally, in today's toe-to-toe segment, Mike and I will identify 3 PBC breakout candidates for 2021. You don't want to miss that. But first, Manny Pacquiao is back in the news. The Philippine senator and boxing legend says he's looking at an April return to the ring and could possibly fight twice in 2021. Pacquiao, who turns 42 this week, hasn't fought since July 2019. We all remember what happened, a rousing split decision win over Keith Thurman. It was a great battle. And of course, everyone is trying to figure out who is on Manny's hit list for 2021. Mike, in your opinion, what would be the most intriguing fight for him?
The most intriguing to me would be Errol Spence Jr. If Pacquiao were even 5 years younger, I think this would be a no-brainer for him. As it is, it's tough to see Pacquiao. I was going to say it's tough to see Pacquiao winning that fight. It's tough to see Pacquiao taking that fight. But he likes challenges, and look what he did against Keith Thurman.
Right.
He looked like he was still on top of his game, so anything's possible. I could obviously make a similar argument for Terrence Crawford, but I think Spence right now is the man in that division.
Well, so you've got Spence for intriguing. Who would you say would be the most competitive matchup for him?
I think that's Mikey Garcia.
Okay.
I think that's the perfect fight for Pacquiao. Garcia is an elite guy, probably a future Hall of Famer, which is attractive for Pacquiao. And he's a small welterweight, like Pacquiao is. So physically, I think it's a good matchup. You know, in terms of resume, I think it's a good matchup. I just think it'd be a good fight. So I think that's the perfect one.
Yeah, for sure. It's a great fight. I also like Pacquiao versus Spence too, and I think it's competitive. I wouldn't advise any welterweight to sleep on Manny. But what about most lucrative? What's the biggest fight financially out there for Manny Pacquiao?
Okay, if I'm his advisor, his business advisor, my main concern is to make as much money as possible. I say go to Conor McGregor. I almost hate to say that because obviously I'm a boxing guy, but I think Pacquiao's earned the right to fight whomever the hell he wants. He'd make a fortune against McGregor and it'd be really easy money for him. I mean, McGregor would stand no chance. So if you want to make as much money as you can, and I understand that, then McGregor's your guy.
Yeah, I could see that. That definitely would be a huge fight, although I'm hearing McGregor's name being attached to a whole bunch of people now, YouTube stars and so forth. So who knows what will happen. But enough of the speculation. We do have some matches coming up. So let's jump into the PBC fight of the week. This Saturday, PBC returns to Showtime beginning at 9 p.m. Eastern Time with a damn good triple header, if we may say so ourselves. In the main event, we've got bantamweight action as Emmanuel Rodriguez takes on Reymart Gaballo for the vacant interim WBA World 118-pound championship. But before we break this one down and get into our picks, Mike, let's start with the essentials.
Okay, Rodriguez, 19-1 with 12 knockouts. Gaballo, 23-0, 20 knockouts, which is an intriguing record. Rodriguez, 4-1 in his last 5 with 2 knockouts. Gaballo, 5-0 with 4 KOs. Rodriguez last fought, unfortunately for him, in December 19th. He was stopped in 2 rounds by Naoya Inoue. Gaballo fought, I knew I'd have to say this name, Chaiwat Krathak, TKO 6, December 14th. Rodriguez, 60% KO ratio. Gaballo, 87%. Rodriguez has fought 103 rounds. Gaballo, only 61. Rodriguez is 28, Gaballo 24. Rodriguez turned pro 2012, Gaballo 2014. They both fight from an orthodox stance. They're both 5'6". Rodriguez 66.5-inch reach. Gaballo 68. He's got a little advantage there. Rodriguez is from Puerto Rico, Gaballo from the Philippines, and those are the essentials.
You know, it's interesting. The experience obviously is clearly in Rodriguez's favor. I mean, it's an intriguing matchup, period. And let's start with Rodriguez. I mean, you just heard the stats. Where would you rank him among bantamweights today?
Well, I think Naoya Inoue sort of put him in his place in his last fight, taking him out in 2 rounds. But Inoue does that to pretty much everyone, right? I don't want to judge Rodriguez too harshly based on that fight. He's a good, tough fighter normally. He looked good in the fight before that, a decision over Jason Maloney. It was a rough fight, but he looked good. And he outpointed Paul Butler before that. So to answer your question, I think he's a notch below Inoue and probably Nonito Donaire, John Real, Casimero, and possibly even Guillermo Rigondeaux. But he's as good, or he could compete with anybody else, maybe even a few of those guys. So he's a solid guy.
What about Reymart Gaballo? I mean, there's been quite a buzz surrounding him. We know he's a Manny Pacquiao protege. What can you tell us about Gaballo?
Well, the jury's still out, obviously, because he hasn't fought at this level. But I'll say this, though. The fans are going to love this guy. He fights like a guy whose nickname is the Assassin. He can box. He actually has a nice jab when he uses it. He just doesn't mess around at all. When he unloads power shots, his intention is like to knock you out with every single one of them. Although he's probably open to being hit too, I suppose, because he's so aggressive. He's been successful doing that against second-tier opposition. Again, I don't know how he'll fare, stepping up against Rodriguez, which is definitely a step up. But I have a feeling Rodriguez is going to have his hands full with this guy.
Yeah, it is a step up for Gaballo, but he's so aggressive. He's young, he's hungry, he's powerful, or at least from what we've seen thus far, that it seems to be a dangerous match for Rodriguez. So with that in mind, who are you picking?
I am going to take a risk here. The obvious choice would be Rodriguez because of his experience, because he's the guy we know. But I'm going to take a chance based on what I'm seeing and hearing about Gaballo, and I think he's going to get him. I think he's going to knock him out in the 7th round.
Ooh, I like that. Very, very risky. Darn, you kind of stole my thunder. Nah, I'm not going with Gaballo. I am going with Emmanuel Rodriguez to win a unanimous decision over Gaballo. What will be a tough fight. He'll have some scary moments, but I just think he's more experienced, better skilled, a really good fighter who unfortunately ran into Naoya anyway, and unfortunately, no matter what round he hits you in, you could go. And so I like Rodriguez here, but I do think Gaballo is live. I think it's a great matchup. 2 other bouts on the card are both really intriguing. In the co-feature, we have the return of Boots. Undefeated welterweight Jaron Ennis takes another step up in class. He's facing the veteran Chris Van Heerden. Mike, Van Heerden may be the best opponent on Ennis's ledger so far anyway, but we know the Philadelphia native, he's bursting with talent. He's considered a rising star. Can Van Heerden trouble him at all?
Well, you know how I feel about Boots. Van Heerden's a solid, real rugged guy, but no. He showed how tough he is by lasting 7+ rounds with Errol Spence in 2015, but he's not quite in the class of these elite guys, Spence and Ennis. I think he's going to show his ruggedness again. I think he's probably going to take a lot of hard shots, but I think in the end he'll get overwhelmed by Ennis's all-around ability, and he's going to get stopped. I think Ennis is just too good for this guy.
Well, even if he does take some shots, if he's able to extend Ennis a bit and fight back, it'll be a learning experience for Ennis, I think. Now, in the televised opener, Antonio Russell, brother of WBC featherweight champion Gary Russell Jr., he takes on Juan Carlos Payano in a huge step up. Now, older brother Gary Jr. celebrated, obviously. Antoine Russell, another brother, he's another big time prospect. He actually beat Jaron Ennis in the amateurs, undefeated fighter coming up at 147. But what about Antonio, Mike? What can you tell us about him?
I think he's potentially really good. It's all there. He's probably not as quick as his brother, but but he's got fast hands. I think he's sound fundamentally. He's got good power. Throws a lot of punches, which I like. He seems to be able to take a punch, although he doesn't take that many. He's got good defensive skills. We just need to see how he does against next level opponents, and I would describe Payano as a next level guy.
Yeah, certainly. I think it's a big step up for him, but I'm looking forward to it. Is it too much too soon, though?
I guess we'll see, but I don't think it is. This is a tough fight, but and a good test for Russell. He's 27. It's time that he does this, right? Payano has lost 3 of his past 4 fights, but all of them were against good fighters. He lost to, Inoue, Luis Neri, and Daniel Roman. And I think he looked pretty damn good in his last fight against Roman.
He sure did.
Him. Yeah, if I recall, it's somewhat of a disputed decision.
Right.
So he's definitely a tough out. I just think Russell has the talent and enough experience to get past this version of Payano. I'll add this. Russell had this in spite of what I just said. Russell had better be ready for a battle because Payano doesn't go down easily.
Yeah, he sure does. And he hits hard. He's got the experience. It's a great matchup. No matter what happens, I'm looking forward to that card. But that's not all the action this week. Wednesday night, PBC on FS1 is back with another undefeated welterweight prospect. Eimantas Stanionis returns in the main event against Janer Gonzalez. Mike, what are your thoughts on the matchup and on Stanionis?
Yeah, we've talked about Stanionis here before. I really like him. I think he's a complete fighter. He's got the amateur background, physically imposing guy. I think he's got all the skills. He's got real tight technique. I just think the kid's got it all. He just hasn't been tested at a high level, but I really like what I see.
Yeah, and I like the way he's been active. I mean, he just fought last month. Knocked out Justin Deloach, and what was a step up for him. He's definitely a name to look out for. Now, another name on the card I'm keeping a close eye on, and you guys should too, is 18-year-old Fernando Molina. He also fought a few weeks back. Kid looks like he has a really, really bright future. Now, on Saturday night, we've got the return of Saul Canelo Alvarez. He is back against WBA 168-pound champion Callum Smith. The vacant WBC strap will also be on the line, so a lot at stake for both fighters. Mike, is this fight as good as it looks on paper?
I think it's a legitimate fight. Of course, Alvarez is the better all-around guy, and he's the one with the resume. That's why he's around. I think he's around like a 4-1 favorite, which is pretty wide at that level. But Smith is a good fighter who has his own advantages. I just think the physical numbers are really interesting. Smith is 6'3", Alvarez is 5'8". That's a big height advantage. Yeah. Smith has a 7.5-inch reach advantage. Those are just interesting numbers. And this is Alvarez's 4th fight above 160 pounds. Smith has fought above 168 11 times. So he's the naturally bigger guy. Now, again, I don't expect Smith to win the fight because of his size advantages. But that, combined with his ability, I think could present some problems for Alvarez. In other words, don't be shocked if this is more competitive than you might think it will be. This isn't Alvarez versus Liam Smith, who's Callum's brother. This is a tougher fight.
Yeah, definitely. It's a good matchup. I mean, it's 2 of the world's best at 168. You got Canelo. What more can you say about him? And you mentioned all the attributes for Smith. He's tall. He's long. He's a good boxer. He's got good pop. He's quick. He's a thinker in there. He did show some limitations versus John Ryder a year ago. A lot of people thought Ryder deserved the decision. Nevertheless, Smith is a top fighter at super middleweight. Is he good enough to beat Canelo is the question. So, Mike, what's your pick?
Well, it's probably good enough, but he's not going to do it. I think in spite of everything I just said, I mean, I still think that Alvarez is going to break him down and stop him, probably late. I'll say KO 9.
I like that because I'm going with Alvarez by stoppage too. I think he's looking to make a statement in his comeback fight. He's been in the gym. He's going to go to the body. He's going to break Smith down. He's going to finish him off round 9 or round 10 as well. So we've got the same eyes for that fight. Now, the night before, the IBF middleweight champion, Gennady Golovkin, returns against number 1 contender, Kamil Szeremeta. Mike, what's your take on this fight?
I think Triple G is going to look like the old Triple G. When I say old, I don't mean in age. I mean the terror that ripped through the middleweight division. Szeremeta is a solid boxer, but I think his style is sort of made for Golovkin. He doesn't have a lot of experience at this level, and he definitely can't punch. Triple G's probably just going to walk through this guy and break him down and knock him out. And maybe, just maybe, obviously Alvarez has a lot of options, but maybe this sets up a third fight with between Triple G and Canelo. We'll just have to see how all that plays out.
Yeah, maybe that's why he's fighting Zerman. I mean, this
exactly.
It's
the day before. The day before.
I don't think Golovkin wants to lose out on his next big money fight. So there you have it. Just a reminder, guys, I'm still one game up in the prediction league. 33-5-1. Mike is 32-6-1. That will change this week. We'll see what happens.
Unless there's a draw.
Right. Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't expect one in either of those two fights. The question is, can you catch up or will I pull ahead? I checked my Magic 8 Ball regarding whether you could catch up, and Magic 8 Ball said unlikely. So we'll see what happens. But it's time to bring in our guest this week. As we mentioned, Showtime Boxing returns Saturday night with a pretty fun triple header in their final card of 2020. And cards like this have become the norm under his watch. He's gone from working as a lawyer with Mike Tyson and Oscar De La Hoya to now the president of Showtime Sports, Stephen Espinoza. Stephen, Showtime Boxing returns this Saturday for a final time in 2020, another triple header. So many changes to the card in terms of replacement fighters and so forth. Is this the new normal?
Unfortunately, it is. Candidly, I'm not sure why more promoters and more networks don't make the investment. We're seeing a lot of canceled fights. We're seeing, a fair amount of last-minute replacements of questionable quality, and there's really no excuse for that under the current circumstances. It does require some preparation, some thought ahead of time. It does require financial commitment. But we look at this card in particular we've got on the 19th. I mean, we started with Donaire versus Ubali.
Right.
But we had Emmanuel Rodriguez available when Ubali dropped out. And so we really didn't suffer for quality there. And you had Donaire versus Emmanuel Rodriguez. Then Donaire goes down. And then we've got Reymart Gaballo also on the card in the same weight class, who is, young and somewhat untested, but 23-0 with 20 KOs. And all of a sudden, we've lost 3 fighters off that one fight, and it's still a high-quality fight. The same with Jaron Ennis. We had a backup available in Chris Van Heerden, who had been training and testing in the off chance that something happened. And, unfortunately for Thomas Delorme, something did happen. And then in the opening fight, we had an off-TV fight that probably we end up streaming just because it was such a high-quality fight. But because we needed Gaballo for the main event, we needed a new opening fight. So Antonio Russell, Gary Russell's brother, will be making his TV debut against Juan Carlos Payano, who we saw earlier this year against Daniel Roman. So with that amount of fighters and still to end up with, I think, 3 high-quality fights, it can be done. It just requires a lot of planning and some financial commitment.
Does it significantly or does it in any way impact the bottom line? I mean, you mentioned a financial commitment. It seems like you have to have backups for the backups.
Yeah. And I think what we're finding is that fighters understand. And a guy like Chris Van Heerden, who's going to stay in shape most of the year anyway, now he's going to be training as specifically for a stand-in on this card, get a little bit of money, continue to train, and then all of a sudden, he's in the co-feature on Showtime. So, for a lot of these fighters, the ones who are diligent anyway and who are trying to keep in shape year-round, it's not that much of an additional, sort of commitment from their part. Worst case scenario, they do some training and some preparation, make weight, do some testing for a fight that never happens, but they still get a little bit of money. Best case scenario, although, no one wants anyone to get sick, but for a replacement fighter, you may find yourself with a great opportunity like Reymart Gaballo all of a sudden is in the main event against a former world champion.
Stephen, can you assess how the bubble went in general, what you learned, what could have been done better, and so forth?
Well, I think we probably needed to have a few more conversations with the fighters before the early events, and just to let them know exactly what a commitment and what it would be. Everybody's bubble is a little bit different, but for ours, there really is no. PBC is very, very strict in that you really don't leave your room unless it's for an official event like the weigh-in or press conference, or to go to the meal room at a designated meal time, or a scheduled exercise session. On the production side and with Showtime personnel, the only difference there is you are in your room unless you're going to pick up a takeout meal somewhere on the property. Other than that, you're eating in your room, you're socializing in your room, you're doing all your meetings in the room. That's fine for TV executives and production personnel. That's a very different experience, especially in terms of cutting weight for a fighter. So we saw early on, the very first fight, David Benavidez miss weight, and he took responsibility. But the reality was, I think he misjudged what was going to be taking place on scene, and thought he could drop a little bit more weight than he could have. And we made some adjustments in terms of what was available to the fighters during fight week. But I think at this point, people know what to expect. And I think the one thing that boxing fans, even those who closely follow the sport, may not completely grasp or comprehend, it's really a drag fight week. I don't want to sound like I'm whining, but everyone who's there, whether you're on the crew, you're helping with load-in, whether you're PR, working for the network, working for the promoter, you're coming in whenever you come in, Tuesday, Wednesday. You're coming in an extra day early because you have to test and quarantine, and you're staying in your room pretty much 24 hours a day until fight night. And after a while, look, it does get really old, especially if you're someone who is in early in the week because of PR, because of setup. You can only eat so much room service and watch the same cable TV channels for so long before you start going a little crazy.
I guess it'll all seem like a breeze next summer, assuming we're past this craziness by then.
Yeah, this is something that hopefully we'll look back on and look at, a very strange 1 year period, maybe a little bit more than that. With a little bit of luck, it'll just be a blip on the radar, hopefully soon.
Yeah. Moving off the challenging environment. Now, you've been in the boxing business for the better part of the 21st century. We met a long time ago. But you've been a fight fan even longer. I think I read your grandfather introduced you to the sport when you were about 7 or 8, something like that. Growing up, Which boxers were you most fond of?
Well, growing up, obviously, Ali. That was, that was the first really sporting event of any kind that I remember, was the Ali Spinks fight. And my grandfather was a big Ali fan, and of course, being from Mexico. It was Chavez. Julio Cesar Chavez was, he walked on water, in that generation. Then, as we got older, Camacho, Senior, obviously, then, ultimately, Tyson, Roy Jones, and De La Hoya.
Did you ever think back then, or, growing up, that you would be so closely involved with the sport?
No clue. Look, I'm Tyson. Mike is a couple of years older than me, 2-3 years older than me. So I remember vividly, him winning, being the youngest heavyweight champion, and winning the heavyweight title at that point, and just being a couple years younger than him in my mid-teens. And if you had told me at that point, that I would be, Mike's lawyer at some point, or, in 92 when Oscar's coming out of the Olympics, that, I would be helping him form a boxing promotion company, less than 10 years later, I wouldn't have believed either one. That wasn't on my, it just wasn't, that wasn't the path that I assumed I'd be taking. It wasn't the target. I'm thrilled it ended up this way, but I never would have predicted it.
You mentioned Tyson, De La Hoya, Mayweather, as well. Whether as a lawyer, as an executive, you've been involved with most of the sport's biggest names. I won't ask which one has given you the most heartburn, but I will ask which mega events brought you the most joy and fun.
Well, I'll answer a slightly different question. Which was sort of, I think, the most memorable events. I mean, clearly when I look back, I'm going to look back with a lot of pride on Mayweather-Pacquiao, Mayweather-McGregor, just because of the sheer scope and stature of the events. But there's some other ones that really stand out for me as well. I would say De La Hoya, Fernando Vargas. And also, the third Barrera Morales fight. And I would mention both of those the same because the reason why they stand out to me is they were so emotional. This was not about business. This was not about, respect. And, it wasn't really so much about boxing even at all. Those were just pure turf wars. It was, De La Hoya and Fernando Vargas, that you talk about the Battle of LA, and you could, every press release, every press conference felt like it was going to, break out into a scuffle. Just every event, even before the fight was scheduled, there was just such animosity. And you felt that also in Barrera and Morales, had that same kind of rivalry. It later turned to respect, but there was such emotion coming into the fight. Those fights really stand out as ones where you were on the edge of your seat during the fight, where you really had a rooting interest, and you were personally invested in those fights, whatever side you were on. It was really hard to be neutral. And then the obvious pick, Mayweather-Pacquiao. I think because I had been involved from the very start, and back in 2009 when we had originally come the closest and it fell apart over drug testing. I never thought that I would have a role in helping bring it to fruition. 6 years later, in 2015, in a very different role. So I think those are the things that stand out to me. I think Mayweather-McGregor, Mayweather-Pacquiao, just because of the scale of the events and the scope and almost the feeling that no one really thought that either of those events could possibly be that big. But then there's going to be events like Barrera Morales, like De La Hoya Vargas, which personally, in terms of the excitement level, just were unmatched.
By the way, I watched the Camacho documentary, Macho, a week or so ago. It was fantastic. I'm hoping you guys do something on Mayweather-Pacquiao or Mayweather-McGregor, something like that in the future. Yeah,
there's been enough time that we can start to look back on it. Me, I'm a little bit partial to, from a storytelling perspective, to Mayweather versus Canelo, because you had such different personalities. Two guys at very different points in their careers, different fan bases. You had this marathon long press tour, 11 cities in 9 days, where everyone just absolutely got sick of each other, and that kicked off this whole long thing. And that's one that I think there's a lot of untold stories around.
Oh, we look forward to that. And speaking of looking forward, I think based on the fights we saw this year, it's safe to say that rumors of Showtime Boxing's demise were greatly exaggerated again. Were you guys pleased with the results?
Well, it's hard to say please, just because it feels disjointed. It doesn't feel natural. We still really miss the crowds, and that's one thing that I think separates boxing from just about in every other sport. I mean, there's a different energy, a different adrenaline, a different electricity in a boxing crowd than any other sporting event. So I think boxing, maybe more than any other sport, really suffers without the crowd. And I'll tell you, we were really grateful. It was really reassuring and comforting, really, to hear the crowd in the Davis Santa Cruz fight. Mm-hmm. It felt like home, like it was supposed to. So, but aside from that, look, I'd say I think we're satisfied. Again, it's been such a strange situation, and that I don't think anyone would say they're happy with how things gone, because so many things have had to be sacrificed. But I think navigating what we've done, I'm proud of what we've been able to do. I'm proud that we've had minimal transmission of illnesses on our events, and with that, I speak to sort of the Showtime on the production TV side, because there's two different testing regimens, one that's applied to the fighters and the promoters, and then the network takes care of all the production people. So I think overall, certainly there have been some fights that have been canceled, but I think the fan experience has been preserved from the very start. We were committed to having some replacements there, and I think that makes the world of difference to the fan at home. So I think we're satisfied with how we've navigated this, and unfortunately, it looks like we're going to have to continue navigating that for a while. But we look forward to being able to welcome fans back and get that energy back into these events.
In a more general sense, but along the same lines, critics continue to call boxing a dying sport, even though I think it would be the most prolonged death in the history of the world. What do you say when someone throws that at you?
There's a series of responses, and you're absolutely right. I mean, you can pull up newspapers from literally the 1920s that are writing of boxing's demise. And yes, everyone's aware that if you go back, far enough, you can go back to a point where, the biggest sports in the country were, baseball, boxing, and horse racing, before the NBA and the NFL and college sports really became as popular. And yes, it was great that, Ali fights on network TV and Camacho and Ray Leonard and all those had huge audiences, or even go back to, Lennox Lewis and Klitschko and Vitaly Klitschko, drawing an audience of 6 or 7 million. Yes, the audiences are smaller today, but that's the case for series programming on TV. That's the case for sports on television. There's just a lot more competition. Those people who tend to believe that the sport is dying or is dead already, I tend to find that those people are generally pretty parochial. Those people, in that sense, what I mean is you assume that if something doesn't hit your radar, it's not important. That if I don't experience it, then it must not be meaningful. And it's sort of the height of arrogance, because we could probably come up with 100 different examples, whether it's, youth or demographics. There are all kinds of things which are very popular today. Look, I'm not on TikTok. That's not on my radar. I don't have kids. But I'm not going to sit here and say, look, it's irrelevant. simply because it doesn't pop up in my life very often. And that's what I think some of these people are in boxing. Because if you look at, for example, African-American households or Latino households in the U.S., boxing is a top 3 sport consistently. Is it up there with, NFL and NBA? In the mainstream, across the board, no. In certain demographics, it is. And I think part of your question is probably, the latest round of boxing is dying because of these celebrity events, and that, it's nothing new. They were doing celebrity boxing on the Fox network in the 1980s. You can go back to Ali doing, pro wrestling, or Mayweather doing WWF at the time. It hasn't been exactly like this, but it certainly is not a death knell for the sport. No one looks at the Masked Singer and thinking, wow, that's really bad for the recording industry. Now everyone's just going to put on like a costume and sing off key, and that's going to kill, people aren't going to want to see Alicia Keys anymore. Well, one has nothing to do with the other, literally nothing. This is an entertainment product. Some of it may interest me. I thought the Tyson Jones show was pretty entertaining.
Yeah, me too.
I didn't come to it looking for top tier boxing. Anyone who was looking at that would have probably been disappointed. But if your expectations were for entertainment, I think it delivered. But to say that this is substituting or overtaking boxing, no. It is something different. Is it gonna? I don't think it's gonna hurt boxing. I don't think it's particularly gonna help boxing either. But it certainly is. It doesn't mean that boxing is dying.
Now, 2 years ago, Showtime Boxing and PBC gifted the fans with boxing's first upfront. You also did something similar to help the sport begin to emerge from the pandemic this year. Do you have anything like that planned for 2021?
We'd like to. We definitely would like to. It's a little bit more difficult given we've got a whole different factor of unpredictability with COVID right now. But I do expect that in the first quarter, in January, maybe February, that we will be doing an extended rollout of several months. Look, at some point, I'd like to go even further than the 6 months we announced together with PBC back a couple of years ago. In retrospect, when we did that, we did January through June, and I think all but one of the cards really held in its original form the way it was announced. So it can be done. I understand that it takes a lot of effort and it's difficult, but there's no reason why boxing can't be more organized. It can be. We can do things ahead of time, and it does help. And I think we should all try to do that. I think, part of sort of the cynicism that sometimes infects boxing is that even its most enthusiastic supporters sometimes sometimes sort of just throw their hands up and say, well, boxing's disorganized, and stop asking for improvement from the sport. I never want to give in to that cynicism. We can do better. We can expand the base. We can make it work better. We can improve judging. We can improve the scoring and make it more reliable. We can tweak the rules to make them safer and more fan friendly. These are things that can be done and should be done in a properly operating sport.
Yeah, I agree, and I think the schedule idea is fantastic. I mean, it was well received the first time. What are the goals for 2021? Generally speaking, what is Showtime Boxing looking to accomplish in 2021?
Well, I think the one of the biggest things, and it sounds like a pretty basic goal, but I think it's important, is sort of reliability and consistency. over this last year, we've had everything but that. And when I say we, I don't mean boxing. I mean the world as a whole. There's very little that's reliable and consistent, and it seems like the world is changing every day. We've adjusted. I think now is the time that we need to reinforce the value of the sport. I think I've been on record saying that I think the time away from sports is bad for the sport. I don't support this theory about there's all this pent up demand. It hasn't shown to be true. The reality is, if you take something away from people for months at a time, most of the time they figure out other stuff to do with their time. And, I think that's something that we're seeing across sports. And that just means we need to work, twice as hard, 3 times as hard on making the right fights, and quality top to bottom. Not top-heavy cards, not mismatches, not misrepresenting the importance and the caliber of fights and fighters, but high-quality fights. This card on the 19th, I think it fits that. To open with a great young prospect or potentially great young prospect coming from a boxing family and Antonio Russell, versus Payano, who's fought at the world-class level, a step-up fight for Jaron Ennis, and then what I think is going to be a really entertaining main event for a world title. Those are 3 meaningful fights for fight fans. They're not all familiar names necessarily, but they're all evenly matched and meaningful fights. And I think that's how we get the fans back, is a consistent schedule of quality top to bottom, and the fans will recommit to the sport and will be even ahead of where we were before this all happened.
Speaking of matchups, without giving away too much, unless of course you want to give away too much, are there any particularly juicy matchups that pique your interest as a fight fan?
Well, I think what we're looking at bantamweight, and not just because of coming up, but at bantam and junior feather, you've got an incredible array of talent. Whether and you've seen a lot of them already on Showtime. Thus far, whether it's Emmanuel Rodriguez or Donaire or Casimiro or Payano or Danny Roman or Luis Neri. And I know I'm mixing weight classes there, but I'm sort of putting them all in a group of, now it's sort of what we saw at 147 and 54 a couple years ago. I think, we have the potential of that at 118 and 122. There's just, you just put the names in a hat, pick them out, and it's a great matchup. Other matchups, look, nothing certainly is set, but, we got 2 really exciting fights out of the Charlos in the doubleheader pay-per-view. For Jamel, there's one obvious piece. I think the only thing he's focused on is getting undisputed, and we'd love to be a part of that. And he just needs to add the WBO title there. It's not a foregone conclusion, whoever the title is, but I think that's something that we've had a role in over the last 2 or 3 years, and we'd love to finish that off and for that to happen on Showtime.
What names can we expect to see back on the network next year? And will guys who fought elsewhere possibly return to Showtime?
I think so. I mean, I think there's a lot. As always, the boxing world is fluid, and networks change and platform commitments change. But look, I think in one sense, we'd love to see Mikey Garcia in a big fight again next year. I think Tank has gotten to the point where he's undeniably, one of the bigger stars in the sport, and he's got some mouth-watering fights. We'd like to continue with both Charlos. I even think that we could be back in business with Deontay Wilder under the right circumstances. And I think we've got a lot of young talent. I mean, I can't say enough for the performance of Chris Colbert.
Man.
There was a lot going on Saturday, and 3 different fight cards. But to me, Colbert is the one that really left the impression on me, because his combination, the only thing that you would have looked at coming into that fight as something lacking is maybe power, because in terms of the boxing skill, the athleticism, the speed, the quickness, it was all there. But that certainly didn't look like a guy who lacked power on Saturday night. So right there, that is the kind of star-making appearance that really can change the trajectory of a career. And I think Chris Colbert stepped up, when the lights were on the brightest, and he's someone that I want to see again, really quickly.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he was incredible on Saturday night. We saw All Access come back for Gervonta Davis, Leo Santa Cruz, and it was well received. It generated a good amount of traffic online. Can we expect more shoulder programming like that in 2021?
I think so, but I think just like everything else, it will change format. I think you see more and more of it living on Instagram and Snapchat, and eventually TikTok as well. But the real value of that stuff is putting it everywhere, which is why we make those episodes available, both on the network and not. And it's gotten to the point where really the Showtime exhibitions on the network, they used to be the priority. They're not anymore. I mean, there's so much more that goes on demand, and then a whole different category of YouTube and web viewing. So I think there's some really fertile ground for that. I just don't think it'll be the traditional 30-minute episodes. It'll be more of the type of content that you see spread all over social media.
Now, that particular fight was also shown on Viacom's Channel 5, I believe, in the UK. Are there plans to integrate boxing elsewhere like that after the merger?
Well, I think so. I mean, look, Viacom has 3 international networks, and that's Network 10 in Australia, Channel 5 in the UK, and Telefe in Argentina. What do Argentina, Australia, and UK all have in common, among other things? Well, they're all pretty good boxing markets, very good boxing markets in particular. So I think there's stuff to be done there. I mean, look, if we can sort of align ourselves with Telefe and find the next Marcos Maidana, coming out of Argentina, find the next Australian star and get a leg up on developing that talent, and the same with the pipeline in the UK. I think the sport would benefit, and certainly Showtime would as well.
Stephen, you mentioned the Charlo twins earlier. Can you see yourself pairing them again next year? Could that be something we could look forward to?
It depends. Part of the story that we told them is it's a little bit of a catch-22. Look, they obviously, they're brothers, they're family. They're going to defend each other and to the core, and they root for each other. But at a certain point, there's also this tension about becoming their own men. And, you get to a certain point in the career, and I think a certain point as twins where you want to be known as an individual and not one of twins. And certainly, if you're an undisputed, champion, and like Jermel is, you certainly deserve to be known as Jermel Charlo, now not just one of the Charlo twins. So I think, that had more to do with, the time of year. I think either of them are ready to headline a pay-per-view in the right circumstance. So I don't think it's necessarily needed for them to pair up in order to support a pay-per-view. I think that was more a pandemic thing and trying to over-deliver in terms of the value on a pay-per-view.
Makes sense. Speaking of pay-per-view, what's your reaction in general when you hear promoters or quote-unquote sources tweet on pay-per-view numbers that haven't been released yet?
I still wonder, the fascination, and I still look. I get it, and one of the things about boxing that draws fans in is that it's all such melodrama, making deals and the rivalries and the feuds, and you are able to follow the business of it in a way that you can't in the NFL, and you can't go. No one else conducts their negotiations publicly the way boxing does. And it's just it's a whole level. And I understand there's interest in that, but what it does lead to is this strange subset of boxing fans who are supporters of a promoter or a network as opposed to fans of the sport. We at Showtime, we want all the good fights, but if someone else does well, Wilder Fury does well somewhere else, it's good for the sport. Errol Spence develops a pay-per-view following and is popular in Dallas and able to bring in tens of thousands of fans into the Cowboy Stadium. That's great. It's literally the rising tide that lifts all boats. I don't understand the rooting for each other's misery or at least reveling in each other's misery, because there's such a prevalence of people declaring either a loss or a victory, a huge flop or a massive success on just limited rumors of information. It's sort of silly. The pay-per-view is not sort of a referendum on popularity. It's a tool to help fund fights that wouldn't otherwise get made. And whatever a fight does, if it does 100,000, 200,000, that's $5, 10, maybe $15 million that wasn't there before to help pay for the fight. So understand, boxing fans, they want value for their money and they deserve that. But I don't get the rush to sort of, I just don't get it, to be quite honest, why there are some who, seem to be defenders, not of particular fighters, but of business entities. It's sort of strange. I've never understood it.
Now, you brought up popularity, the sport's popularity. There seemed to be a drop in TV viewership numbers across the board for sports in 2020. Would you attribute that to the pandemic, to cord cutting, or was it a combination of both?
I think it's all of those things. I think, look, I think we saw it in 2016, among other things. It's also a unique presidential election. This last 6 months was unlike any other in terms of television and politics. We are coming through a time where, even for the most avid sports fan, sports just doesn't quite seem as important. It's just not the life or death. Oh my God, it's going to be miserable if my team loses on Sunday. It's just not like that anymore, because there are issues of life and death and, illness and joblessness and economic distress. there are more important things going on. And as we've touched on, I also think the environment. I think it is, whether it's the NBA, in their bubble, or boxing or any other sport. I think part of the enjoyment, is damaged without the environment of excitement and energy and adrenaline. It is a communal experience, and watching it is communal. So without the ability to see crowds and hear crowds, and without the ability really to watch, games together, the experience is very different. It really is. So I think it will continue to grow. I think it's just this is a major change in the way media is consumed and experienced, and it's going to have repercussions for a long time to come.
Now, with respect to Showtime, how do you qualify or quantify the success of Showtime boxing cards? Is it the ratings, the subscription numbers, or is there some other internal metric that we're not privy to?
It's a really good question. It's exactly the question that that people should be asking, and it's relevant to sort of what you joked about earlier about Showtime being in the business. I've never worried about Showtime not being in the boxing business, because we are privy to the inside information, and ratings are one piece of it. But ratings have become, even for sporting events, they become less, I won't say less important. They don't tell the complete story. There are streaming numbers. There are delayed numbers. There are people who watch it, the same night, the next morning, because they like to fast forward through stuff, or watch it on their DVR or whatever. There are business drivers. There are fights that drive business, that we see that actual subscriptions pick up on the day of the event or the week of the event. Oh. So there's a variety of different ways that we quantify value that aren't immediately apparent just from Nielsen. I would say Nielsen is just tip of the iceberg. And in fact, for us, Nielsen is much more important, obviously, for ad-supported. For ad-supported, your Nielsen viewership, literally determines your revenue. Your viewership and what you can charge for ad rates, that's the lifeblood of your business. Our viewership is nice, but we don't monetize viewership. We monetize monthly subscriptions. So, that's a better indicator of the health of our programming than how many people are watching on a particular night. We instead focus on, how happy are our subscribers, and there's a variety of metrics, most of which, are not public, and most of which also sort of reinforce the value of boxing at Showtime.
Oh.
A couple more things real quick. Getting back to Saturday's card, undefeated Jaron Ennis, who you mentioned, faces Chris Van Heerden in a step-up fight. He's probably my favorite prospect right now. Obviously, he's a rising star. Assuming he wins that fight, and it's not a sure thing. Is there a plan for him, or what's the plan for him going forward?
I think he's reached the point where he's going to be talking eliminators or interims or title challenges. I think for 2021, his opponents are going to be some of the household names of the division. I'm not saying he's going to call out Errol Spence immediately, but I think right now he has shown himself to be the question is is he in that elite, that top tier of the division? And the only way to find out is to see one of those guys in the ring. Is it an Ugas or a Jamal James or a Keith Thurman or whoever's available? I think those are the kinds of names that Jaron wants, that Boots wants, and I think that's what the fans want too. Is see what is actually the ceiling on this kid. Now, you can say, he hasn't fought top-tier competition yet, and he hasn't. But you can tell a lot about how you perform against, the competition that you do have. And he is dominating. He's just crushing guys, and doing it in convincing fashion. These are not close fights. He's dominating, and that is why I think boxing fans are so excited about him, is because at this point, it seems like the sky's the limit in terms of his talent.
Last thing, everyone keeps asking about Adrian Broner. There was talking maybe back in January. Is there any plans to have him return anytime soon?
Yes. I mean, look, everyone's got their own opinions on AB. Love him or hate him. He brings attention to the sport. It's not always good, but look, I'm looking forward to having him back. It's been 2 years since we've seen him fight. I think he still has a lot in the tank. And I think he might have some surprises in store. So I do believe we will have him back in January or February. And, I think 2021 is going to be an interesting year. I'm not going to, give away his plans yet, but I do think there will be some people who are surprised with the path that he chooses, and it's going to be interesting to watch.
Interesting. Oh. Stephen, great as usual. We know you're the busiest guy out there, so we really appreciate the time.
Well, I appreciate that too, and I'll take the opportunity. I appreciate you guys mentioning Camacho. That was a documentary that we wanted to do for a while, and we knew we had to do it justice, because there's a great story or there's a story of great tragedy there. But there's a lot of joy and passion and enthusiasm for the sport. And, I've always felt that Camacho really doesn't get his due. He was ahead of his time in terms of his showmanship, in terms of what he brought to the ring. And for some reason, he's not always mentioned as one of the greats of his era, and he absolutely was. So that's one film that we're very, very proud of, because I think the director, Eric Drath, absolutely nailed it.
Yeah, he did a great job. And, I didn't, a lot of the stuff about Camacho, I didn't know he was a little bit before my time. So it's interesting to see not just how popular he was, but how good of a fighter he was. But I really thought the great part of was the mother, was his mother. It was just, touching to watch her journey throughout it. And it was just something to watch. It was really something to see, and I hope she gets that closure.
Yeah, I mean we could have spent the whole film on his murder and the mystery around it, and it would have been a really interesting film. But that would have missed the point of celebrating who Camacho was, and the joy and passion that he fought with, what he meant to the Puerto Rican community, what he meant to not just the island of Puerto Rico, but Spanish Harlem. He's really of the time. He was not just a Puerto Rican star, a boxing star. He was one of the biggest stars in sports. I mean, there's that clip in there of him visiting the White House with Ronald Reagan. And it just reminds you, Camacho was on that level. That's how big a star he was.
Oh. Well, thank you so much again for taking the time out to do this. I hope you have a wonderful holidays. If we don't speak to you before, then we look forward to having you back on again soon.
Absolutely, guys. And I think, look, I'm excited. It's sometimes, we all get caught in being sort of somewhat negative and maybe, depressed about the challenges our sport faces. But, I see things like Chris Colbert and Richardson Hitchens and, Jaron Ennis and, go back to Isaac Cruz, from the Davis undercard, or, the return of Regis Prograis. I look at that stuff, and there's a lot of exciting things which we're on the cusp of. So I'm thrilled on where the sport is as we go into 2021.
We can't wait.
All right, thank you guys.
Always great to chat with Steven Espinoza. Looking forward to the Showtime card on Saturday. But what about the one last weekend? I mean, we may have witnessed the launch of a rising star in the main event. Undefeated WBA interim 130-pound champion Chris Colbert took another step up in class, facing Panama's Jaime Arboleda. Only it wasn't competitive at all. I mean, Colbert dominated from round one. He dropped Arboleda once in the ninth, and then he put him away with 2 knockdowns in the 11th that earned him the stoppage victory. A big win for prime time. Mike, based on what you saw, what is Colbert's ceiling?
I thought he just looked terrific. I think the talent level there is in the 99th percentile, which meaning there's not too many guys who are more gifted than this guy. He has the ability, the speed. He's dynamic. He's an entertainer, I think. He's very, very confident. He can switch hit effectively. He doesn't have great power, but I think he showed us again against Arboleda that he can hurt guys. He obviously did in that fight. If I have anyway, the bottom line is I just thought he looked terrific. If I have any criticism, it could probably be that he could be a little bit more disciplined, I think. For example, he probably didn't need to fight with his back against the ropes as much as he did. That could come back to haunt him against some guys. Although I think he generally got the best of even those exchanges, but that might have just been the disparity of talent, between him and Arboleda. And it worries me maybe a little bit that he keeps his hands down as much as he does, but some guys can get away with that, and he's one of them. And I think he actually tightened things up late in the fight. Although what I found interesting is it wasn't quite as much fun to watch when he did that. Like when he fought more conventionally, it wasn't quite as much fun to watch. So his sort of confidence or his swagger in the ring is entertaining, but maybe it's a little bit risky too. But anyway, overall, to answer your question directly, the sky is the limit for this guy. I think he could be a star.
Yeah, I don't want to overstate what I saw, but I said this on Twitter right after the fight, and I'll say it again, even though I may get some backlash. But I was getting Floyd Mayweather vibes watching him. I mean, the 2000 version of Floyd. Colbert looks scary good. There's no doubt he studied Floyd, and maybe I saw, part of that mirroring. But Colbert also has the speed. He's got the defense. He's got the ring IQ. Now the power. He can fight on the outside. He looked like James Toney in close quarters. He went to the body. Showed a good beard a few times that he did get tagged. I mean, everything you want to see in a prospect, he showed, and he did it with style, which suggests to me that he can be a star if he continues to dedicate himself to his craft. And it appears he really does. It's been a long time since I've seen a fighter show all of those things, a young up-and-coming fighter show all of those things in one night. I mean, the fact that he did it in his first headliner speaks volumes to me. I mean, this kid may just have it. Mike, how far away is he from challenging a Gervonta Tank Davis, who's probably considered the king of the super featherweight division?
I think he could probably compete with anybody right now. You put him in the ring with anybody, I think he's competitive, but I don't think there's any reason to rush it. I'm not sure that would be rushing it, but that's sort of how I feel. Get him a little bit more seasoning, a little bit more experience at a high level, expose him to more things so he understands how to deal with them. I can definitely see him fighting a contender in his next fight, just not Davis and not Miguel Berchelt. Maybe those two guys are off limits for right now. I'm not saying those fights are going to happen anyway, but I would say shoot a little bit below that because I think he could pretty much hang with anybody else. And that includes Leo Santa Cruz, Jojo Diaz, Jamal Herring, that level of guy. I know he probably couldn't fight Shakur Stevenson anytime soon, but maybe one day that's a really good fight because Stevenson's also a talented guy. But anyway, he's right there.
Yeah, I mean, I think you continue to move him at the pace he's being moved at right now. So to me, I'd say he's about 2 fights away, maybe 3 at most. But more important, I think when you look at Colbert versus Tank Davis, for instance, that could be a super fight. So, beyond just what he does in the gym, and that's vital, he also needs to continue to build his star power outside of it so that the fight itself, reaches its full potential. And if he does, I mean, what a fight it would be. Who would you like to see Colbert face next?
Without, naming names, although I kind of just did name some names. It's just that the level that well, this is championship level, but I think right now he can handle a guy like a Santa Cruz or a Diaz or a Herring. So that level guy, maybe just drop down one for his next fight, maybe drop down just a small notch below that. So maybe a top 5 guy, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. He's got a few options. I mean, look, if Tevin Farmer is willing to take the risk, I like that fight for Colbert. Xavier Martinez is another good name, although I kind of want to see both guys have another fight or two before they face off because I think it's that good a matchup. Billy Dibb is another name out there. And you mentioned a name that I like too, where I feel like maybe not necessarily his next fight, although I'm okay with it. But if Colbert is able to get one of those guys I just mentioned in the ring and win, I like a matchup between him and Santa Cruz. I mean, I think that's a really, really good matchup and a good test for where he's at, a good barometer for where he's at versus where Tank is. Although Santa Cruz is no barometer. I mean, Santa Cruz is the big test. So
interesting matchup too. The interesting style matchup. Yeah,
definitely. And Santa Cruz's experience would definitely come into play. I'd love to see that fight. But again, lots of good names out there for Chris Colbert. And lots of good names for Richardson Hitchens. Hitchens, the rising 140-pounder in the Mayweather promotion stable, took his step up in class against former world champion Argenis Mendez, and he outboxed Mendez for the most part, won a 10-round split decision, although to me it should have been unanimous. Mike, what's your take on Hitchens?
I think he's a good prospect. I don't think he's as dynamic as Colbert. I'm comparing them because they fought at the same time. But I think he's got similar tools. He's quick. He can box. Difficult to hit. Real good defensive skills. He's a little mechanical, sort of jab, straight right, jab, straight right, move around. But it works for him. I thought he dominated, a pretty good fighter in Mendez. You mentioned the decision. One judge, Don Ackerman, scored at 97-93 for Mendez. I have no idea what he was looking at. That's just a horrible, horrible card. I thought Hitchens controlled the fight from the opening bell. That was a nice performance by him.
Yeah, it was, and the best I've ever seen him. The tools are there. He's got a great jab. He showed some veteran moves as well. Good movement. I haven't seen him look that good before as a pro, which tells me he's really been putting in the gym and the work. Now, Mendez had his moments. He just couldn't keep up with the activity, the movement, the speed, the jab. He's 34 years old. Where does he go from here?
I don't know. I think he's like a good stepping stone for talented guys, sort of like he was on Saturday. I mean, he needs to throw more punches to be taken seriously. I just don't think he was busy enough in that fight. He was just too passive. But he's got some ability. He's got the background. He could keep fighting. I think he showed enough to show that he could be competitive with most guys.
Yeah, I think so. I think he's still capable. Perhaps maybe becoming a world champion again is unlikely, but he's a fun fighter to watch. And he can still pull off the upset or two, on an up-and-coming fighter if he catches them slipping. It seemed to me, that Hitchens was simply all wrong for him. Now, speaking of Hitchens, Mike, where does he go from here?
I really think this guy can go a long way. The talent's there. Doesn't have a lot of power, but some guys don't have a lot of power and they still go a long way.
Yeah.
Maybe in the ring he needs to take a few more risks. Try to knock out his opponents to become a bigger attraction. I'm not sure. I think what we saw was really effective, but it wasn't. Like I said, it wasn't as dynamic as Colbert's performance. Maybe that's something that he needs to keep in mind if he wants to become an attraction. I don't know. I definitely like his ability, though. He's only had 3 scheduled 10-round fights, 10-round fights so far. So I'm not sure he's ready to face an elite opponent. But I bet he could beat a fringe contender right now. I see him fighting for a title maybe as soon as 2022. I think he's that good.
Yeah, I like the progression so far. Think he's still a ways away. I wouldn't mind seeing him against a Ryan Carl or Rances Barthelemy. A really fun fight would be Hitchens versus Subriel Matias. Talk about a matchup of styles. I think the fans would really dig that one. But I like your timeline. I think he's moving that way. Now, one more note on this card in the televised opener. Ronald Ellis won TKO over Matt Korobov when Korobov suffered a leg injury. Real tough break for him. Now, across the pond, we saw the return of Anthony Joshua last Saturday. Joshua successfully defended his heavyweight title, stopping mandatory challenger Kubrat Pulev in 9. Mike, what were your thoughts on AJ's performance?
I thought he looked good. I think he might have found a nice balance between boxing and aggression. If you remember, in the rematch with Andy Ruiz Jr. after he got knocked out, he was extremely cautious in that rematch for obvious reasons. He just didn't want that to happen again. I thought in this fight he looked more comfortable. He looked more confident against Pulev. He boxed, he was patient, and, forgive the cliche, but he let the knockout come to him, which is probably how it's supposed to be. He looked like a guy who could compete with Tyson Fury, I thought. Now, I should add that some of that had to do with Pulev. I think Pulev looked his age. He was slow. He always seemed to be a step behind Joshua, if you will. I thought he was going to lose the fight, but I expected a little more from him. Still, overall, I was impressed with Joshua. I think that was a good night's work for him.
Yeah, I picked him to win in 3 initially, and I thought the ref should have stopped it in 3 when Pulev was down and practically running away from Joshua.
Yeah, it was close.
Yeah, but the funny thing is that, that didn't happen. And then we saw like the ponderous Joshua in the middle rounds.
He did. You're right.
Yeah, he was sort of tentative, slow. He seemed to be thinking more than he was doing. But then he finished strong. He found his openings in the 9th. He closed the show emphatically. Based on what you saw, scale of 1 to 10, or however you want to do it, how high do you rate Joshua's chances of beating the WBC champion, Tyson Fury?
I'm going to give him a 3, which actually is not that bad. I think Fury is a better boxer. I mean, to me, it's clear. And definitely he's mentally tougher than Joshua is. I think that's still an issue with Joshua. I don't know if that's 100% fair, but it's just it's obvious to me. Joshua obviously has more punching power, which gives him a chance against anyone, including Fury. We've seen Fury go down, although going down is overrated. It's whether you get up or not, and he's always gotten up. I just think that Fury's just too good, too clever for Joshua. Remember, he made a fool out of Vladimir Klitschko. And I'm not sure how much better Joshua is than that version of Klitschko.
I'm going to say 6. I think he has all the tools to beat Tyson Fury.
You're predicting him to beat Fury then if it's a 6, right?
I just might. I think he can stop Tyson Fury. I know that sounds blasphemous. You mentioned him. You mentioned Tyson Fury, obviously, not just he's gone down before, but he's gotten up. But I remember the way Otto Wallin hurt him in the 12th round of that fight. I remember the 2 knockdowns against Wilder. I know he can be touched. I think Joshua's a great finisher. And look, I would still lean toward Fury by decision if that fight happens, but don't be surprised if I do make the Joshua pick because I think he has that good a chance. Obviously, we're going to have to wait and see what happens with Wilder Fury 3 and see if that comes off and the WBO mandatory for Joshua. So stay tuned. All right, it's time for Mike and I to go toe-to-toe, and this week we're breaking out our list and selecting our top 3 PBC breakout candidates for 2021. Now, we each came up with a list of names, so there was some redundancy, but we've rectified that by ensuring none of our names match. So, Mike, we'll start with your first candidate.
Okay, maybe this is sort of obvious. We've already talked about him here, but the obvious choice is Chris Colbert. As I said earlier, I think he has it all except special punching power. He's got skills and speed and athleticism and dynamism. I think he's durable. He's got flair. He's confident. I mean, I could just go on and on and on. He's got it all. And I think as he gets stronger, I think that he's gonna get more and more power. I think he's gonna hurt more and more guys. He's still really young. He's still gaining his man strength. So I think even that could come. I just like everything about this guy. As we both have said earlier, I just think he's got what it takes to evolve into a star. Now, of course, we have to wait and see how he looks against next level opposition. I just have a feeling that we're going to like what we see.
Yeah, I love Chris Colbert as a breakout candidate. It almost feels like he broke out last Saturday, but you point out the level of opposition. Look, Jaime Arbeloa is a pretty good fighter. Wasn't like he was in there against a slouch, but there is another level in that weight class and a couple more levels, and I'd like to see how he fares, but clearly the skills are all there, and if he continues to put the work in, I'd be shocked if he didn't become a star. Now, my first 2021 PBC breakout candidate is undefeated WBA 140-pound champion Mario El Azteca Barrios. Barrios looked great in his last fight, stopping Cowboy Ryan Carl in 6 rounds. He's a big, super lightweight. I expect him to move up to welter soon, but before he does that, he does have some options at 140. Regis Prograis is a name that's been thrown around for him. Subriel Matias is another name. Adrian Broner, maybe a Victor Postal. Barrios is a gym rat, and And I always throw my support behind those kind of guys. He's got a great trainer, Virgil Hunter. So I expect him to see him in a big fight in 2021.
I like Barrios. The only thing is I keep thinking about his fight against Batyr Akhmadov, where he was lucky to get the decision. Now, you could look at that as a positive. I think that was a learning experience for him, and I thought he looked much better in his next fight against Ryan Carl. But I want to see him. I considered him for one of my top prospects, but I want to see him win another tough fight in order to put him over the top.
Yeah, so do I. Let's see what happens. But I suspect there will be some big plans for him next year. Let's go to the next name. I'll kick it off this time. My next choice is Isaac Cruz. Now, Cruz is only 22 years old. He campaigns at 135, and those who caught him on the Gervonta Davis, Leo Santa Cruz pay-per-view undercard saw him absolutely blitz Diego Magdaleno in one round. I think he's just now starting to come into his own. He's fast, he's extremely powerful, and he's fearless. I don't know if it's too soon for him to face Gervonta Davis, but it certainly would be a fun fight, a risky fight. Maybe a Rolando Romero is someone he could fight, a Richard Comey, whoever it is. I need to see this kid back in the ring again soon.
Can you imagine that version that we just saw against Gervonta Davis? That would be insane.
War.
Yeah, I just thought I just absolutely loved what he did in that fight. He just looked like a killer. I'm not sure he's going to do that every fight. I'm not sure he should do that every fight. But, I mean, if that's the guy we see going forward, he's like, must-see TV kind of guy.
Yeah, definitely. So who you got? Who's on your list next?
So I'm going to go with one of my new favorite guys. Maybe a little too soon for him, but I don't think he's thinking this way. Sebastian Fundora.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, again, I think the jury's still out on this physical freak. Remember, he's 6'6", and he fights at 154 pounds. He's the same height as Anthony Joshua, which is just insane. But I like this guy more and more every time I see him. He's just fearless. He's got power in his punches. He knows how to land power punches. He's just destroyed his last couple opponents. He might have to wait until 2022 to break through, but again, I don't think that's what he wants. I think this kid's got a ton of confidence, and I think he wants it now.
Yeah, he's being moved fairly quickly and looking better each time out. It's a stacked division, the 154-pound weight class. So you may have a point regarding when he'll get that shot, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's sooner rather than later. He looks that good. All right, time for our third and final picks. Mike, who do you got?
The aforementioned Stanionis. Again, I think he's a complete fighter. He's got the pedigree. He was a good amateur and Olympian for Lithuania, for his native Lithuania. He trains in Southern California now. Physically imposing guys somehow, which is always an interesting concept because, obviously they're the same weight, but there's just something about him that makes him physically imposing. He's got all the skills. He's got the technique. He's got a nice jab. His punches are just heavy, which I like. I love the way he digs to the body. I thought his performance against Justin Deloach a few weeks ago was just really strong. He started conservatively, just real discipline, but he got better and better as the fight progressed. And by the end, I'm just like, wow, this kid's really got something. I think he's got a bright future.
I do too. I like the fact that he's back and busy. I can't wait to see him in the ring on Wednesday. I expect him to shine again and turn a few more heads. Now, my last pick is Michel Rivera, another really good lightweight. Undefeated at 19-0. He's a great boxer. He's got good pop. Kid's only 22 like Isaac Cruz, but he fights like a veteran. Maybe him and Cruz are a fight down the line. Who knows? I don't know. But it seems Rivera gets overlooked when you talk about all the good young talent at 135, but you can make a case for him. I mean, he's right there along with those guys. Yeah,
I think, for the purposes of this, I went back and watched some of his fights. I think you can argue he's the second best guy that we mentioned behind Colbert. He's a good boxer. He's got a nice jab, but talk about heavy punches.
Yeah.
Man, oh man, they're just real heavy thudding punches that land. I mean, he's just like physically overwhelms his performances, but he can also box. So yeah, another guy that you have to keep an eye on.
Yeah, for sure. Now, all great picks. Looking forward to seeing those guys in the ring again, and hopefully we'll at some point refer to these lists and see what happened. But that's going to do it for today's show. We want to thank Steven Espinoza, for joining us. As a reminder, guys, PBC on FS1 returns Wednesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern time, with one of Mike's breakout candidates in the headliner, Emmanuel. Plus more PBC action on Saturday night on Showtime, a fantastic triple header beginning at 9 p.m. Eastern time as well. So be sure to check that out and to check us out once more when we return with more boxing talk next week on the PBC podcast.